first of all, welcome. My name is Ciel Vaughan and I'll be your host. I work with Share Screen Africa. This is our last event in the Communication Skills for Conservationists series, but definitely not the least. I wanted to say a very big welcome to our primary audience for this event, which is the Toronto University of Technology students, and also a massive warm welcome to our online audience as well. Thank you so much for joining. We're really, really happy to have you here. So for today, these are our key learning outcomes. So these are what we're really hoping that you'll come away from the session understanding and knowing this. So first of all, understand what to do and when you're asked to speak. Learn how to craft compelling and structured narrative that resonates with your audience. Gain practical skills in using the PrEP framework to communicate clearly and persuasively. And finally, and most importantly, know what not to do. So before I introduce our wonderful speaker today, I just wanted to run through our sort of rough agenda today. So we'll start off with a bit of an introduction. That'll be about 10 minutes. We're then going to have part one of the presentation, which will take about 15 minutes. And after that, we're going to go into some breakout rooms, which is where you'll use that document to do the exercises. Our speaker will explain that to you. So just to note, when we do go into the breakout rooms, it's going to be a completely random selection. So you'll just be randomly assigned into a group and that will happen automatically. You'll see a notification that asks you to join the breakout room. So don't worry about any of that. Following that, we'll then have part two of the presentation, followed again by another breakout session. That should take about another 15 minutes. We'll then follow up with 15 minutes worth of speeches, which will culminate at the end of those breakout sessions. We'll have 10 minutes for evaluation, then followed by the Q&A, and then finally we'll have about 10 minutes to wrap up. So the whole session today is booked for 2 hours, so we should finish at 12 p.m. South Africa time. So now on to our wonderful speaker, Mr. Mark Lottig. So ever since Mark left his own company that he started, he's been taking part in business and entrepreneurial mentoring. And what he's realized through all of this is that the way we express ourselves is so central to everything that we do. Mark's actually been mentoring us as a Share Screen Africa team as well. And so we're also in the process of learning this. And we're really excited for this session. I think it's really, really important for any context that you're in. And Mark, we thank you very much for giving us your time and expertise. And I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Ciel. Let me share my screen to start off with. And I hope this is going to work. I think, yes, I think this is working. Can you see what I see?
Yeah, looks great. Thank you, Mark.
Okay, very good. So what is this about today? What is it about? It is about a quote, in a way, that you've already heard 2 sessions ago when Dr. Casilla was speaking. But because what she said is that ultimately, the goal of communication is persuasion. And if you think about it, when you talk to your friends, when you talk in a group, when you're asked a question, you often want people to listen to what you're doing, saying, and you want them to be maybe adopting your opinion as well. So for the most part, we want to persuade. And today, I want to convince you, I want to persuade you, that's why I'm here, that a good speech works best when it answers a question, when it actually answers a question. The question is, which question? And it is a question you can ask. So I have here on the page that you can see 2 questions. And one of them is, how do speeches work? And in the title of this talk today, I was introduced about talking about the art of communication, but perhaps it's more a craft than an art. It is something you can learn, and I do not believe you need to be talented to communicate well, but you need preparation, a lot of preparation. And the word prep is going to come back in various forms during our talk this morning. So how do speeches work? What is going on? So, and now I wish, Now, the next question we can ask ourselves, so before we answer, is why do we speak? And as already mentioned, we may do this with our friends, we may be asked a question, but we may be in an interview. But the typical settings that we end up with is that we want to inform, we want to inspire, perhaps we want to entertain, we're in a debate, or we're in a conversation. And these are typical settings. And sometimes the setting gives away why we speak. Today, you all know why I'm speaking. Perhaps you think I'm speaking because Dr. Ogilvy has somehow convinced me to do this, and you're her students, and that's why we're having this conversation. Or you're at a wedding and you're being asked to give a wedding speech, or at a baptism, or perhaps in an interview, you're asked to present yourself. Or when I was doing my entrepreneurial stuff, we constantly had to raise money. So I was talking to investors and I was trying to convince them that what we were doing was really worthwhile. So it is quite important that we establish upfront why we are speaking. Why are we actually taking the stage? Oops, wrong direction. Now, the second question we have to ask ourselves is, how long do we want to speak? And you've just been told that we have an introduction that actually went faster than we expected, less than 10 minutes, and that now I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes. And it means that I have 15 minutes. That's the time frame. And later on, I'm going to come back and I'll have time again. And this is what we typically do. We typically speak in the context of having been given a certain amount of time to speak. And you can use, as you prepare your speeches, word count. We all use word processors these days, Microsoft Word or something comparable, to work on our speeches, to craft our speeches, to draft them, to write down our notes. And I propose to you that you begin with about 100 words per minute. Just 100 words. Because we speak a little bit faster. I'm probably speaking at about 130 or 140 words a minute now until I pause. And CL earlier, and she knows this, and I think she's going to be smiling behind her screen, is not somebody who pauses as much as she could do. But she can, therefore, say more words per minute. But it depends what you feel comfortable with. And over time, you will develop your own pace and you will realize what is a good pace. It might be 90 words a minute, or it might be 120. 100 is a good starting point. Now, typically, when we give shorter presentation, a short pitch, maybe less than 3 minutes, we can get away with very few pauses and we can speak faster. And when we do longer speeches, just because we as speakers also need a little bit of time to breathe, like now, maybe over 7 minutes, we slow down. We need more time. And then when we present something like I'm doing right now with slides, we also have to give ourselves a little bit of time to switch from one slide to the next. And to give the audience, in this case you, a little bit of time to digest what's on the slide I've just been speaking about, and to anticipate what may come next. So it's 100 words a minute to start off with. So if you've got 5 minutes, 500 words, maybe 550 is a good starting point. So let's move on to the next slide. Oops. Now, what language do we use? Sounds like a silly question, maybe. Obviously, we need to speak in the language that our audience understands. And if I were to speak French now, which I can also speak, you might not be quite at ease and we might miscommunicate, but that's not what we're talking about. That's kind of funny and trivial. The point is, do we use simple language or do we use complicated language? Do we use buzzwords that are common maybe in the scientific field that we speak about? And I want you to listen carefully because I'm trying today to not use any complicated words. Not one. Just simple words that are easy for me to articulate, really easy to talk about, and are easy for you to listen to. And the crossing point between the expert and the casual conversation is ultimately plain, educated language. Just plain, good, proper, grammatically correct English, for example. That's all we have to do. That's the language of our audience in most cases. And it works for educated audiences as well as for your casual conversation. And in an interview with a company, it definitely works. And also look at words you can articulate well. If you struggle to say a word, get rid of it and use something else. And it is also helpful to make statements. And again, I want you to listen quite carefully to how I'm doing this today, because I try to make sentences short and direct with very limited clauses and to have a little pause now and then. And then there is something very important about speeches, and it's something important when we write them. We write our little script. And that is that an essay has to be much longer than a speech script. And I'm going to demonstrate this right now, because if I stop in mid-sentence, as I just did, you, the audience, are continuing to think for me. If I give you the chance by sometimes again pausing, giving you room, slowing down, I give you the chance to think for me, to do part of my presentation for me, to think about the language we use. And remember, we just talked about the timing. How long should the speech be? You're probably thinking, is he really pausing as much as he says he does? And that's exactly what I want you to be doing. And I need to give you space to do this. Now, the most important bit, in my personal opinion, about the speech. It's that everybody knows, what is it about? What am I going to talk about? What are you going to talk about? And it doesn't matter what it is you talk about, whether you're presenting a paper, your thesis, a project, an idea. If you're responding to a question in an interview, you want the listener to know, what are you about? What is this about you're talking about? And in an ideal world, you will get to that point within 10 seconds. Now think back. At the beginning of our presentation today, did you know what this was about? Did I directly tell you what this was going to be about? I think I told you I want to persuade you about something. And that's exactly what I want to persuade you of. To listen to what I have to say and to perhaps adopt some of the ideas. It is also helpful to have a tagline, one sentence that somehow summarizes what your contribution is about. I used a quote from your previous speaker, that every speech we do is persuasive. We want to persuade people. And the proposition can also explain in that one sentence why we speak. Well, I'm speaking because I'm trying to convince you of something. And it goes without saying, and now the loop closes, that the proposition is the basis for persuasion. Now, what is it about that you're speaking about? And it is often that speech writers spend a long, long time working out exactly what their proposition is. And we'll get back to this again later. But as you're going to be drafting little comments and little mini speeches, think about that you begin with a question. What is my proposition about? What is it I am going to be speaking? What is the offer I'm making to the audience? What do I expect from the audience? And to try and get that into one sentence, best you can. Now, we already said, what do you not say? Well, how often have you been in a presentation where you get confused because the speaker is talking about so many different things and you're not quite sure what they want? So the golden rule is you only say what serves your one proposition. There is only one proposition in every presentation you make, only one. There may be many supporting arguments, but there's only one proposition. And one of the reasons I like to use scripts, and I recommend scripts to everyone I work with, is that scripts allow us to remind ourselves what not to say. The reason we write scripts is not to remember what we have to say, because usually we speak about things we know something about. So in a conversation, we could comfortably talk about it. It's not about remembering what we want to say. It is more about remembering what we decided we wouldn't say because it does not serve our proposition. We may have a fantastic anecdote, a joke, a little detail we want to talk about. And it's really interesting. But if it doesn't serve the proposition, and if it's good enough, it will find its way into the next presentation you do. Or maybe it deserves its own presentation, but it doesn't belong in the one you're doing now unless it serves that proposition. And then again, pause again, give the audience time to think for you, to relax, give yourself time to breathe, to take your time, to slow down, to collect your energy maybe, and then move on. Right. Now we can move on to a little different section here. So we've talked about why you speak, who you speak to, that you know who you're talking to, what the setting is, that you know how long you want to speak, how many words you can use. And we've talked about sticking to the one proposition using useful, easy language. And now there is something which is really important, is that humans love stories. And we can read about this in psychological books about psychology. We can read about it everywhere. Humans connect through stories. We love stories. And if you read up on it, you will realize that broadly speaking, every movie in Nollywood, every movie from Bollywood, every movie from Hollywood, all of them have the same pattern. Every good fictional story always has the same pattern. The reason why it has this is that it works. It connects with us. And it roughly works like this, and this is going to come over again. I'm going to talk about it over and over again today. It comes in a very simple form. Once upon a time, every day, until there was a change. And you can see the curve. It's the everyday life we have. And then there is a change. And the story then goes through the change. And things happen as a result of that change. One thing happens, and then because of that, something else happens, and because of that, something else. It's a struggle that then develops until one day there's a resolution. And whatever we do, we start off in the everyday world, like me, for example, at the beginning saying, oh, do you want to know how to speak effectively? I could have also told you that perhaps you face an exam where your presentation counts and that you need to do something. And then you go through the story and you learn a little bit here, you prepare, you struggle, you collect your ideas, and then you end up with your presentation. And the end of the story is always just a little bit better than the beginning. Not too much, because otherwise it becomes unbelievable and it's not that interesting, and not too little, or it's disappointing. Just enough. So every story goes through this curve of everyday life, a change, a struggle, and then the resolution at a slightly better point. And when you craft your speeches, that's what you try to do. So in here, what I'm doing today is I gave you at the beginning a challenge. How do we persuade people? And now we go through this little storyline and we work our way back to trying to come up with the right answer. Now, to frame all of this, right, we've got the storyline. The question is, what exactly do we speak about? And for most of the things we speak about, we have to answer to our audience, why am I speaking and what am I speaking about? And then there's also the question about how do you actually do this? Now, today I'm actually spending a lot of time on how, but I could have just ended at the beginning and then waited for someone to ask me, and how exactly do you do this? And that would have given me the license, the permission to go into detail. My recommendation to you is make sure you know exactly why you're speaking, and your audience also knows it. Make sure the proposition is clear. Everybody knows what it is you're speaking about. And then you will see a reaction that people want to hear from you. How exactly do you do this? Where is the detail? So focus on why and what, and think about letting how, all the detail, wait for a moment until your audience has understood why you're speaking and what it is about. Now, there's also some really old ideas around. And actually, I might be the last person left. I'm a little older than most of you who talks about this, and it comes from ancient Greek time. It's been around for more than 2,000 years, about the logos, the ethos, and the pathos. And we can immediately forget about this because the modern way of talking about this is to say, I have a narrative, which is a storyline I want to fill. I have characters. That may be me, that may be the speaker, that could be people in the story. It could be animals if you're in conservation. It could be plants. All of these are your characters, and then there's a degree of emotion. I hope somehow that you feel that I'm excited about what I'm talking to you about. I really enjoy this, and there is emotion. So there's a narrative. This is sort of the rational, the reasoned thing you're talking about. There's the character is often you as the speaker, and then there is emotion, which is your energy level and excitement and the desire to speak about this. And now you're going to go off and you're going to use, please, your templates, and you have a problem to solve, which is that last week you heard a presentation about communication. And as far as I understand, there was a dilemma set, which is how do you deal with the type of information, the rumors that were floating around? How do you deal with this? And your task today is to summarize and maybe explain what the conversation was last week and make a proposition about how you would resolve it. This is not about getting the best answer. It's about thinking about what your proposition is, why you're speaking, what it is you're going to be saying, and to simply give it a go using that little template. And you will be put in breakout groups as far as I understand, and you have about 15 minutes from now to do this. Okay? I actually realize I overstepped my time by a minute or two, so you still have 15 minutes. We'll make it up somewhere else. And I think this is a little break for me, a little pause, and now you have a chance to do something on your own.
So welcome back, everyone. We're just waiting for the TET students to get settled, and then Mark will take it over again.
Why don't I just begin while recapping what I talked about earlier, and then we'll get into the next part. So you had a scenario you can discuss, and one of the things we talked about, or I talked about earlier, was what is your proposition? What is it you're going to say? What is it about? Why are you going to talk about it? And then just leave the how, what the implementation was, to a separate conversation, because you will only have 2 to 3 minutes later on. That's not a lot of time, but it is enough time to write your proposition and then explain why that proposition is the right thing to think about. So it is what you're doing now is to, in a way, draft a little mini speech, about 2-3 minutes. And every speech, as I said, follows a storyline, or should follow a storyline, because we humans like to think in stories. We like to tell each other stories. But we can also use a little bit structure, and the template you have, and you're going to notice this in a minute, follows exactly that structure. So the basic speech structure, which you will not be surprised, has a title, an opening, a body, and a close. And in speeches, what we do like to do, or in presentations, is to use the rule of three. 3 examples, 3 points you make. Why, what, how. 3 points. So just 3 points, no more. You can have then 3 points within each point, but make sure that you stick to this little rule of 3 as much as you can. It's a good starting point, and once you get better, you may want to refine this, but it is a starting point. So every one of your presentations needs a title. It needs an opening, what sets out what's going to happen. It then has a body, and it has a close. But I told you earlier that there's a storyline. So how does this work with a storyline? And we'll get to that later. For the moment, this is just the basic style. And there is a helpful, completely minimized version of this, which is called prep. And prep uses PERP. It is the proposition. You state your proposition. I cannot overemphasize how important the proposition is. It is, what is this all about? Where do you stand? What's your opinion? Out up front, so everybody knows what's going on. The R stands for the reason why you gave a proposition. The reason it's an explanation. It can start, I said this because. Then you can use an E, where you can expand on the reason, or you give an example, or both. But it's the E. So proposition, the reason, the example, and then restating at the end the proposition in a different way. And if you look at it, that also can follow a storyline. The title is the beginning, the proposition is where it goes, then you go through the story of your reason, the expansion of that, the example, and you conclude with a different version of a proposition that is a little different and a little bit better than where you started off with. And prep is magic. And it is something I recommend that you keep in the back of your mind. If you get asked a question in an interview, you are ready to answer in prep. You answer the question head on, you give a reason, then you give an example, and you repeat your proposition at the end. So prep is truly magic. Now, what about the title? What about the title? And it is useful to think about the title as part of your presentation. It isn't just something that's on the outside. You can use it to be your introduction. And if I say, how do you write a compelling speech? The title already tells you that I will give you the answer to that question. So it is part of a presentation. And I personally like questions as a way to structure everything, and titles that are questions can be helpful. And it's something you might think about as you do your presentation at the end of term, that you begin with a question. What is it you're going to answer in your little presentation? And when people do thesis, master's thesis, they use a research question. So it's no coincidence that having a title as a question can be really helpful. And sometimes this title can also be a very short mini version of your proposition. But if you want to make it easy for you, the question actually works really well. Then what do you do in the audience? I talked earlier about the proposition. The proposition can be quite provocative. It can be based on a quote. It can create a sense of urgency. It can do all sorts of things. It can create suspense. It can talk about an event. It can indicate a story. Whatever it is, the idea is to get there as quickly as you can. No long talk around. You can even introduce yourself after having told everyone what it is about. I didn't have to do this because Ciel did this on my behalf. But if I had had to introduce myself, I would have first told you what it's about, then I would have introduced myself. Because as soon as you know what it's about, we are having a conversation. And if you want to use humor, so personal recommendation, it's not a good place to use in the opening because we don't always know our audience. And I won't use much humor today because I don't know you. And if I were to make jokes, I can make the wrong joke and it will just destroy the whole presentation. So I prefer to keep humor when I speak in person to the end of what I have to say. And you might actually think if I make a joke at the end that it was overall rather lighthearted. This is a lot harder to do online because I can't see your faces and look at you and see what you feel like and how you're responding to what I say. If you have one joke, keep it to the end. And by that time, you might have gotten a better sense of who your audience is. So having talked about the end, how do you end? Well, you end as you began. Remember prep, proposition at the beginning, proposition at the end. But really important, you only have one ending. You will have heard many people say, oh, let me conclude. And they just keep going on. And then suddenly they have a new point. That never works. Be sure you know what the ending is. And you can think about it like a race. But at the beginning, you get out of the starting blocks, you then pace yourself. But at the end, you're trying to accelerate through the finish line. There's only one finish line in a race. If you have that image in mind, it might help you just focus on that one ending only. And the best endings are a different version of your original proposition because it wraps everything up nicely in a circle. So where does this leave us with the story? Well, it's what connects the dot. So we have the title, which can already include part of your proposition. You definitely set the stage at the beginning to make clear why are you speaking, what is this about? And then you go through the process of the because, the examples, the expansion, and at the end, you get back to the proposition that reflects an insight that comes out of your speech, out of what you've said before. And it indicates a path forward. It is important that speeches end not on a stop. So you don't run to your finish line and just stop right on the line. You run through it. You show your audience that there is something that can happen outside the speech, somewhere in the future. It is outside. The speech, whatever you talk about, points forward. Sometimes this can be a call to action. It can be all sorts of things, but it just needs to be a little bit pointing forward. So let's try this out. And also to talk a little bit about this, the magic of questions. So I've put something on, you can read it here with me. It's about plastic. What is this about? It's about plastic waste in the ocean. I've got a question and I answer it in just 6 words, and it is your plastic I'm talking about. That connects with the audience. Your plastic waste in the ocean, that's what this is about. Why do I care? Why do I feel I can talk about this? Plastic in the ocean? Because I've been traveling around and I've seen the effect of plastic ending up in the ocean many times, in many different places, all across the world. It's there. It's not imaginary. We can see it if we want to. Now, why is this important to you? You live in Pretoria. This is where some of your audience is today at a university. That's in the center. It's not in the ocean. Well, the reality is, it's very likely you have eaten plastic today because little parts of plastic are now everywhere. They're literally everywhere. And we can't avoid them anymore. But at least we don't want it to become more. So it's actually, our plastic is actually about us. And that's why it's relevant, because it's our habitat, because we have a responsibility towards ourselves and our future, and because ultimately, if our environment degrades, it's very hard to keep peace. And that's, I think, what many of us want. And what's the takeaway? Well, the problem is plastic gets used quickly, but degrades very slowly. Organic waste, all the food and all sorts of what's biological, degrades quickly. It gets recycled into nature. Plastic doesn't. And we can act immediately. And it actually doesn't cost anything. All we have to do is to not dump plastic arbitrarily. So what's the takeaway to the future? Where does this lead us? The question about our plastic waste in the ocean? Well, very simple. Simply don't dump plastic. If you can avoid virgin plastic, that's very difficult often. You can recycle, but whatever you do, do not dump plastic. So here was a little speech about plastic based on the structures we just talked about. And it is roughly, this is why having these little templates can really help you just very quickly put something together. And as you might have seen, I could have expanded every single point I just made quite a lot if I had wanted to. But for the moment, that was just a short little summary. And this is roughly what you could now try. You've prepared, you've started to get your mind around it, but you now try to craft something similar that we will then hear from you in about 15 minutes. And we're going to pick 4 groups. You don't know who it's going to be, so everybody's going to have to make a little effort to get there, to have 4 mini speeches, roughly the way I just did, about the proposition, the question, the problem that you came across in last week's speech presentation. And again, you've got 15 minutes. Back to you, Sia.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. So we are unfortunately struggling a little bit with the breakout rooms. So for our online audiences, I'd really encourage you to please maybe work on the exercise by yourselves, if that's all right. And then, of course, the TET students, we've got them in groups already, so you guys can continue to work on it. And we'll see you back in 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, that's our 15 minutes done. Thank you very much, guys. I hope that was a productive discussion. Mark, I'm going to hand over to you. We're going to do evaluations now. Would you like me just to run through the timings with everyone?
Aren't we going to hear the presentations first?
Yeah, oh, sorry. The presentation's not evaluations, that's what I meant. But I do have the background colors as well for timings, if that would be useful.
Yeah, why don't you run through the timing so everybody knows?
Okay, perfect. So, hi everyone. We are going to do our um, presentations now, and I will just run through some timings with you. So I will change my background depending on how much time you have left. So you'll get 3 minutes, and when you get to halfway, oh, there we go. Thank you, Murat. When we get to halfway, you'll get green. And then when you get to 2 minutes, you'll get gold. When you get to 2.5 minutes, it'll come up as red, so you know that your time's nearly over. And then at 3 minutes, that will be the end of your session. And if you go too far over that, we might have to mute you. So try and keep it within the 3 minutes. Mark, over to you.
Very good. So I hope you had a little bit of fun actually filling out the template and realizing that if you just ask a quick question, you might just be able to easily give the answer. And that way you very quickly can create a small presentation. And later on, after the presentations and after the evaluation, we're going to have a little wrap up, and I'll give you a whole section about the magic of questions. So it's something you can look forward to. In the meantime, though, we're going to have 4 people who are going to give it a go to present. We've just heard about the timings, and because I'm sitting remotely, it's a little hard for me. So I'm hoping that I get help from Maret and from Ciel and Dr. Ogilvy about who's going to speak next. But now it's in your hands, and give it a go. Oh, and one last thing. When I work with people and I do this about mentoring, there's one important little thing I tell them. Try to fail. And with that, I mean, don't try to not be good, but be brave to try something out that might not work at the first go, because if you don't, you can't improve. So be brave. You can't fail today. It is an experiment, it's a practice. Just give it a go, get a feel for it, and try to just, I don't know, get rid of the fear that it could go wrong. It won't.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. So we are going to go to the TUT students and Dr. O. We can see her there just in the frame. I believe you've selected a few students who are going to come up and present for us.
Hi everyone, hope all is doing well. This is about a public outrage on social media regarding the treatment of mange in the sandpride lions. Why do I care? I care because I'm a future nature conservationist who will work in this field. I have first-hand experience of what the implications are when a reserve loses funding or has limited funding. Struggle to go away with the salaries that are given and when personnel cannot be permanently employed. Why are you guys involved in this? It is because we all use social media and we all have power in our voice. Therefore, we must use it very wisely and think before we post something. It is becoming more and more common for uneducated animal rights activists to dictate the fate of nature reserves and the lives of, and it is not right. Therefore, we have a responsibility as nature reserves to educate the public in an empathetic manner that they do understand. You can use social media, and it's very easy to spread this information in a way that seems more empathetic to people and they understand and can relate to. Therefore, I say that we should not post stuff on social media without thinking. We must be wise with our voice and the weight that it carries. And we have to start environmental education programs to inform the public of the way that stuff is in a nature reserve and the importance of maintaining the integrity in the decision-making that the reserve has decided on. Thank you. Is there any questions about it?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Mo. Everybody just call me Mo, but my name is Mohove. So I'll just be giving a short presentation about what we learned about last week. My title, what is this about? I personally, after reading the whole title, let's say what I picked up from that was miscommunication between scientists and locals. So why does the speaker care about this topic? Well, I care about this topic because miscommunication can delay progress in scientific research and conservation efforts or community development projects. So miscommunication can lead to conflict, misunderstanding, and strained relationships. It can also result in errors, mistakes, and accidents, particularly in high-stake situations. Why is this about the audience? Well, this is about the audience because mistrust and skepticism. Locals may become skeptical of scientific findings or interventions if they don't understand or trust the information being communicated. And why is this about the audience? Is because as scientists, it's difficult for us to share about scientific findings when when locals or like people don't trust what we're saying. So like it's very important that we are able to communicate clearly to the locals. Body, why is this relevant and why do I care? By prioritizing effective communication and community engagement, scientists can build trust, foster cooperation, and develop more effective solutions that meet local needs. What is the takeaway? Scientists can improve communication with local communities, build trust, and develop more effective solutions that meet local needs by applying and implementing necessary solutions to the problem. In closure, what can we do next? Scientists should use clear, simple language to explain complex scientific concepts, avoiding jargon and technical terms. So as scientists, we should like normalize collaborating with our local partners and with also our local communities. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Angel Singwayo, and I'll be giving an overview of last week's talk. So the title was Communication Skills for Conservation. It was about understanding the importance of stakeholder engagement and communication in conservation in Southern Africa. So it was basically offered to make us effective communicators, how to be effective, transparent, empathetic communicators, and also stakeholder engagement. So why do we care? We care because miscommunication can cause broken partnerships. Effective communication, it aligns interest and prevents backlash. For example, the release of the photograph of the lion was a severe crisis. The graphic image had an emotional public reaction, causing viral backlash and reputation damage of the reserve. And the public will definitely think that the reserve is allowing the lions to suffer unnecessarily. So the speaker's aim was to teach the audience how to communicate effectively if a crisis arises in the workplace. The takeaway in this talk is that effective communication requires all parties to be heard and answered, all concerns and questions to be attended to. The proposal is essentially designed to equip us with the skills to communicate effectively and empathetically. So as I close, it is very important to apply empathetic and crisis communication, best practices to foster trust and meaningful connections with diverse stakeholders. Thank you so much.
My name is Jay Belena, and please let me go straight to the point. The title was Communication Crisis in the Nature Reserve. it was about the concern in the real world example of how a communication crisis erupted around conservation decision making. And then the next question was, why does this speaker care about the topic? How? It is because as a wildlife photographer, he is concerned about the lions that are suffering from a certain disease, and he cares about the animals, so he had to take an action. Why is this about the audience? As it was posted on the social media to inform the audience about the disease of the lions and the causes of the disease, everyone had a chance to comment about this crisis. So as nature conservationists, we should care about the animals, and we should at least comment something that will be helpful in the nature reserve. Why do I care? I care because it's not good knowing that there are animals out there suffering while we were supposed to protect them and make sure that they are treated fine, as much as we treat ourselves as humans. What can we next? I think we should seek for help in any way possible to find the cure for the disease. And if there's no cure, we should do researches and many other things that can be helpful. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we are here to decide about the topic of the mind in last week's talk. So the title, what is it about? It's about media concerns about the mistreatment of animals in the nature reserve. Right? And why does the speaker care about the topic? Right? The effects of the backlash of the media resulted in the damage, the damage of the reputation of the nature reserve, which they can return from that. Yeah. Reserves don't like bad reputation. They lose money that way. Why is this? Why is this about the audience? Well, the audience are, well, let me see, how can I put this? What? Because they lack knowledge, about the regulations and the legislation the nature reserve is under. They couldn't understand why they decided to do what they did, which is let the natural occurring disease be. Let the nature do its course, right? So they couldn't understand that. And then they blacklashed it on the media saying that how can they do this, without understanding. Like, what is the takeaway about this? Well, firstly, the nature reserve can improve. They could do improvement of their communication, the way they communicated with the people. They could improve that, right? What can we do next? Well, as the people, we can learn, since we have access to media, we can learn about the regulations which nature reserves are under, so that we can understand the decisions they make in terms of the animals, so that we cannot just say they are being cruel without understanding the reason why they are letting that thing happen. I'd like to conclude. Thank you.
Dr. Ogilvie, are we proceeding with feedback, and is somebody going to give feedback, or is it me?
I think you're giving feedback, aren't you,
I'm
Mark?
giving feedback. Okay, can I have the name of our fifth speaker, please? Let me just, in the interest of time, just proceed. So we had different types of speeches, and what I found interesting is, first of all, how well everybody did, and also how different styles of speakers came through. And it's important to remember that we can all do this in our own way, in our own style. And there was a particular moment with our fifth speaker where he hesitated in a moment and said, how would I say this? And he paused. I don't know about you, but I was at that moment thinking, what is he going to say next? And then he came back with a smile and with lots of energy and a very clear statement. So it's a good example that there's no problem sometimes just taking a pause, collecting one's thought, and going for it with energy and a smile and excitement about what one has to say. So that was a nice example about how to do this. All 5 speakers knew what they wanted to say, and that came across really well. They stuck to the structure, which, in a real presentation, one wouldn't repeat the questions. Maybe one can, the one or other, but typically one would just leave that to the side as a note for oneself and would go through it. But well done on this as well, to sticking to the game plan. And I don't know, you can discuss amongst yourself, did it work? Did all 4 of them very quickly come up with a well-structured presentation that they delivered? What else can we learn? Well, our first 2 speakers, Stanis and Mo, both talked about the audience specifically. Stanis said, we are all social media users, and Mo talked about the scientists. And so in doing that, they defined who it is they were speaking to. It's very interesting, isn't it? That they chose their audience quite differently, even though they were talking about the same topic. We had one speaker, Jay, who was framing it differently. For him, he talked about how the animal welfare was in the center and how the problem that had been of communication had gotten in the way of animal welfare. Others talked about how the communication problem had gotten into the way of doing the job of the nature reserve or the conservationist well. So quite interesting. We also had an example of someone reading. That is not a problem. We are allowed to use notes. However, it is useful to practice using notes, because when we use notes, we can sometimes forget to pause, to forget to take our time, to sometimes nuance our voice a little bit, to maybe sometimes look at the audience instead of our notes all the time. And so we can practice this. And if you feel you need notes, I encourage everyone to use notes. It's okay. However, make sure you know and you've practiced how to use them. I like the confidence of all our speakers and the clarity of the speech. Angel was very clear in what she said. Really good clarity. One idea for some of our speakers is to not explain what the talk was last week, but to first say the proposition and then to go back and reflect and say what they had to say about last week. To always start with the proposition and to do that second. And what else do I have here? I leave it to you to figure out who it was, but there was somebody speaking who had more than one conclusion, or who had a long conclusion. Again, as I said earlier, it really helps to have just one very precise conclusion. And I think with that, I'll leave it. We've got about 20 minutes to go. And my suggestion is we can have some questions for about 10 minutes, and then I would really rapidly run through the magic of questions at the end as a closing statement. And I guess all of this will be shared anyway with you, either as a recording, or we can also share the presentation if that's useful. So Ciel.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. Since you've brought it up, yes, this presentation will be available as a recording on our website in about a week, as are the other 2 recordings from the other events we've had in this series, which are already available on the website. And Murat will put a link in the chat to our website where you can find all of those there. So let's move on to the Q&A section. Does anyone online have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat, or you can use the function to raise your hand or turn on your camera and wave. I suppose my question, as you mentioned earlier, would be with relation to pausing. I know you've spoken a little bit about pausing and how you can maybe get a bit ahead of yourself when you're reading notes and things, but I would love to just get really into the nitty-gritty of learning how to pause, maybe some more tips and tricks based on that, because that's for sure something that I need to work on.
Well, tips and tricks. It is to perhaps use the punctuation in your sentences to make the pause and to sometimes just slow down in the speaking. So many sentences begin with however, comma. And so one can pause there and say, however, and then go for it. So these little connector words can be useful when we use the word maybe, or perhaps. It's one thing that we can also use as a reminder to sometimes just stop. Because it's again a connecting word, but allows us to just take a breather. Or when one has a punchline, makes a clear statement, to at the end just count to 5 and continue. And whatever pause you think you're making, that's one thing I get told as well all the time. It's much shorter than we as the speaker think. So when we make a pause, we can wait. And when we think it's painful, we wait again. And then we continue. And some of us can smile better than others, which is also a good way. You can pause and just smile while you're doing it and then continue as well. So it's just a matter of practice.
Yeah, I think you're right. Practice definitely makes perfect. And I think maybe the counting as well could work quite well, because whenever I think I'm pausing, it feels like I've been pausing for a painful amount of time, but for everyone else, it's very slow. Okay, we have a comment and a question in the chat from Isolda. Welcome, Isolda. Thank you for joining. So she says, definitely a case of very thorough communication. Thank you so much, first of all. And then she asks, could you please elaborate a bit on the way you breathe?
Well, I'm going to make a joke now because it begins with in, out, in, out. There is what I do, and maybe that is the question, because we can do little breathing exercises before we speak. And we can also make grimaces in front of a mirror or with ourselves. And given that this is recorded, I might not do this right now. But to do silly things, make silly noises in private can really help loosen up a little bit. And then the breathing exercise I'm familiar with is to sit upright. I'm trying to sit up as straight as I can as I'm doing this. And to then just breathe very slowly in and then out a little longer than one breathes in. Just count maybe to 5 breathing in and to 7 breathing out, or 4 and 6, whatever works for you comfortably but slowly is a good breathing exercise to before beginning the talk. Or while we were doing the pauses, I just sit back and I just breathe as well, just slowly, just to get a little bit of energy and calm down. And actually doing silly noises, you know, what little children do, like it can actually be helpful to loosen the lips. And I recommend that when you're in front of your mirror, nothing is too crazy to get you in the mood and energize you. You know, have a little giggle at yourself. Try to make the most ridiculous grimace you can, and it will actually do a little bit something for you. And today we don't have necessarily a mirror, but we use our mobile phone. So have a conversation with your mobile phone and just have a little bit of fun for 30 seconds or so. It doesn't have to be very long. It will make a difference. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very thorough to me. We're still waiting on TUT, I believe. And they must be struggling with their internet. Isolda
Oh,
says,
she
thank you
cannot
very
respond
much.
because, okay, I understand this, But you need to find, if you do this, have a giggle. And it is actually really, okay, there's Dr. Cheryl's coming
Yeah.
back, but it is really helpful. And for me as well, to have this little chat with CL, because I have to concentrate when I do the presentation, but having this little chat for a moment really helps also calm me down and slow things down a little bit, change the pace, make it a little bit more conversational before we become more formal again. So it helps to do that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. I did see TUT just there, but oh,
I
there we
still
go.
see Dr. Cheryl there.
Yes, she's there. I think they're back in now.
So as I promised, and in the last exactly 5 to 10 minutes, we will talk, or I will talk about what is a particular little thing I love, which is the magic of questions. Now, why do I like questions so much? Well, because questions trigger us. If we ask ourselves a question, if we ask somebody else a question, we want to answer. We can't resist. And I use questions even when I script things. I don't put statements as headlines, as lines inside my script or as in my notes. It's always questions for that. And the next paragraph or the next section I'll talk about answers this question. So I try to have questions in my mind all the time that help me, that trigger me. And if I have to give a long presentation and it is completely scripted down to the last word because it's maybe quite technical, then what I do is I just ask myself a question. It's there on my notes and I will want to answer it. Using questions can also help sometimes as we're drafting the script to really check, is what I'm saying actually answering the question? Am I saying more than necessary, or am I saying only what's necessary to answer the question? And the idea is, of course, to only say what the question requires and to not say any more. We had one conclusion. We had this idea of getting to the proposition as quickly as possible. It is a discipline we can stick to all the time. And we can use PrEP, this PREP, also all the time, even in sub-segments as our presentations, and PrEP can be introduced with a question as well. So PrEP is the answer to a question. And I've already said it, we've gone through PrEP, again, proposition, reason, expansion, example, and then a repeat of a proposition. But there are many variations we can use. So we can say, as I did before, what is this about? Why does the speaker care? Because that's what gives us competency. If we know the speaker cares about the topic and we understand the context, then we might listen or we will listen. Why is this audience-centric? Why should the audience actually care about any of this? Why is it relevant? What's the takeaway and what can we do? Which is the open and action in our storyline. The different variation of this is to say, let's talk about the benefits. Why is the speaker here? Well, I'm here to tell you a little bit about these tips and tricks. What's on offer? The tips and tricks that I'm talking about. You can take it. It's something I give you. It's free. You can do something with it. What's in it for the audience? Well, I think we've seen with the examples, if you follow some of this, you can actually draft a speech very quickly, get an outline going that you can present, probably within minutes. What's the effort? It actually takes practice, like so many things. You do it more often, you figure out which combination of questions works well for you, and at some point you can do this nearly intuitively, and the questions will stick in your mind, and you won't have to go back to a template. So preparation and practice. What happens if you don't do it? Well, it's easy. You end up meandering. You end up perhaps not even answering a question. You end up not coming across as purposeful, as really knowing what you're talking about. And perhaps you might even lose your audience along the way. And why should you do it now? Because I think the next time you have to actually respond to somebody who is asking you a question and you want to do that in a structured way, or that you have to give a speech, might be just minutes away. After this, you might end up in a meeting where somebody asks you a question and you can apply this, everything we talked about, not just to speeches, but also to just a slightly more formal conversation. We can create a dynamic story. Talked about this earlier. Use a storyline, a little bit like in a fairy tale. Now, of course, you wouldn't begin by saying once upon a time in a formal speech, but you can have that in the back of your mind, that you talk about who and what is this about? What did normal life look like? What's the moment of change? What did this trigger? What did that trigger again? Like a step function where you work your way back to the final conclusion, the change. And ever since, or forever after, which is always the same ending, what's the future look like? So where are we coming from? What's going on in our minds? And where do we end up? Another version of this is persuasion. You talk about the problem. The problem in this presentation is, how do we make sure that people actually hear what we have to say? And what's the need? Well, if we have something to say and no one's listening, then it's a very unpleasant place to be in. I could talk about more details, how being in an interview can be a very uncomfortable situation if one is unsure about how to answer. One may actually know the content, but one doesn't quite know how to get at this, how to respond. Using prep is a really good way to do this in a structured way. Get a question, give an answer. Explain the answer, give an example, repeat your answer. Prep. Can give you more examples, but I think we've heard 4 or 5 today. Now, how can we satisfy the need? I can do a little bit of a claim and say, try it out, what I'm offering you. Try the magic of questions. And what's next? Chances are that you won't be caught off guard in not knowing what to do when you're asked to give a presentation or answer a question in a slightly more formal setting. So what's the problem? You want to be heard? What's the solution? You will be heard. We can also become personal. We've done this a little bit already. What is it about? Why do I care? Why is it audience-centric? But if you look more closely, you realize that it all matches up with the persuasive part, personal and persuasive, personal and storytelling. You can combine the structures. And the example we already had, I won't run through it again, but it follows exactly that pattern. And with just these notes, one can speak for 2 minutes, 5, 7, depending on how much you know about the topic, how much you want to expand. You can use that as your notes. So you get asked to give a presentation about your field of expertise, you jot this down, you go into the meeting, you have your notes, you ask how much time you're being given. And if you're being given 5 to 7 minutes, which might not be unreasonable, every one of these points is maybe worth about a minute. And you finish in 6 minutes, ahead of schedule, everyone is happy. And that's what I'm going to try to do now, because actually we're coming to the end. That's it. It is 11:57, which means we're 3 minutes ahead of schedule. And that's, I think, what everybody likes, is to finish on time and ahead of schedule. And I hope that you've gotten something out of this. And we will share whatever we can. That's the team at ShareScreen that's going to do this. And as they know, if there's questions, I'm very happy to field them even after the talk. Back
Mark,
to you.
just now that you mention it, there actually is a question that came in the chat just while you were speaking then. And I think it's an important question, so I'd love to get to it. I'm wondering, Cello, if you're there and would like to unmute maybe and ask your question. Cello, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. It's just that my internet is not that great. So if you don't mind, you can read the question for me.
Okay,
I'm
we
going to
can hear
read
you
the
very well,
question.
but we
How
can.
do you, I'll read the question. How do
Okay.
you set yourself up or prepare when it comes to presenting or communicating, especially in a large group? Or if you can give advice to an introvert. Well, I'm not particularly extroverted. I know many people who aren't. And there is only one answer, I think, unfortunately. It is to practice, to join other people who do this and to simply practice doing this over and over again, sometimes in a small group, sometimes in a bigger one. But before you practice, there's something else. It's preparation. Preparation, preparation, preparation. If you know what you're going to say, if you've planned it out, you can prepare not to fail. And once you know that, you can go in front of a group, you can do your thing. You might not be the best speaker of all time, the most, but you will do well. So preparation is the secret. And in my time, I've met lots of people who have struggled because they came through a moment where they did something and they weren't really prepared. And an invitation to you is to say, prepare the speech itself. Spend less time on what it is you're going to say, but all this script and all this writing, and spend time practicing the delivery itself, just saying it. Maybe to your mirror, maybe to your phone, and just make sure you know your thing inside out. And that's a really good way to overcome the fear. And then once you've done it once or twice, you will get comfortable.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. That was really helpful advice. And thank you as well, Selo, for that question. I think that would be very useful to a lot of people. I'm just going to quickly share our key learning outcomes again as a reminder, just while I say thank you so much to everyone for joining today. Thank you to our online audience and of course, Dr. O and your TUT students. I think it's been a really cool interactive session and I hope everyone's learned a lot. And of course, Mark, thank you so much for giving us your time and your expertise. And of course, this recording will be available in about a week's time. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful day.